thyself. I was able to see Matt present back in 2023 at a substance abuse and mental health conference Eric and I went down to. And the information he had really hit home. So I luckily was able to track him down and get him to where he could come and present for us here today. So I'm going to turn it over to Matt, have him introduce himself. Welcome.
Thank you, bud. Well, as he said, I'm Matt Draper, and I could go through all my bona fides, but I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to ask a question. How many of you are old enough to remember when this was called the training school? Oh wow, there's more gray hair in the room than I thought. See, my favorite uncle worked his way through college here. And one day, my mom dropped me off right over there because I was going to spend the day out in the desert with Uncle Sterling putting holes in tin cans at long range. Okay? And so Sterling came out and he was exhausted. He had worked an overnight shift, right? And as we're driving out into the desert, he's talking to me about his joys and frustrations. He called them his boys, right? And they range from profoundly retarded, profoundly disabled is what we say today, to moderately disabled, right? What captivated me at the time is his clear affection for his boys, right? And so one of the things he was telling me about is how one of his boys, Mikey, was really having a snit. He was just being really ornery. But earlier in that same conversation, he had described Mikey as somebody who's wheelchair-bound, nonverbal, etc. So I went, how in the world can he have a snit? How can he be ornery with you? He's wheelchair-bound. And Sterling goes, Matt, see this thing you're doing with your hands? And I say, yeah. This gesturing you do while you're talk? He says, yeah. He says, that's called gesticulating. It's one of the examples of how much of our communication is nonverbal. He said, Mikey was cussing me out all night without saying a word, right? Some of you get it. And so I asked Sterling, I said, you know, he was clearly frustrated, he clearly had a bad night. And I said, why do you do this? Like, there's other jobs, I don't know about easier jobs, but there's other jobs out there where you don't have to be changing diapers on a 6'6", 300-pound disabled adult. And he said something that really struck me. And he said, what else would I do? And it wasn't in terms of finding another job. But what else would I do that means this much? He finished college, he was a high school teacher at Kansas High School, taught psychology and history for many years. And he and I were hanging out the other day, and I said, okay, you've had a lot of jobs in your life. Which two were your favorite? And he said, favorite as in fun and easy? I said, no, favorite in terms of meaningful. And he said, working here and being a high school teacher. Right? Years later, when I was in college, I came across this quote by Perlman and Sakvitny that really struck me and reminded me of this conversation with Sterling. This is referring to psychotherapy. For those of you that are therapists, what we hear all day long is stories of trauma and drama and overdose and suicide and all of these things, right? We get to hear about why people are depressed, and I don't know about you all, but people are depressed for good reasons these days. It's like one of my daughters came to me the other day and she said, Dad, what's the point? I was, oh, that's an existential question coming from a 23-year-old. And I said, what do you mean, honey? And she goes, I looked at the type of jobs I'm good at and how much they pay. I'll never be able to afford it. Right? We got a lot of reasons to be anxious and depressed these days. And in our line of work, we get to hear about it. So why do we do this? Sometimes when people ask us, how can you do this work? We think, how could we not? How could we have the ability to contribute to a journey of hope and healing and not use it? There is no work that we would find this meaningful, challenging, and rewarding. What other work would allow us to engage fully our minds, our hearts, our spirits? How could we choose not to do something that demands our creativity, all of our intellectual capacity, all of our feelings? our whole humanity. I bet you all have bad days working with these kids. By the way, do y'all still call them kids? No?
Individuals.
Individuals, students, right? And they have bad days, and sometimes that informs your bad days. Okay, back when I'm an old man, back in my day, even if they were 40, they were called kids, and I appreciate the terminology has changed. But when you're working with these folks, it can be a very stressful line of work. Whether you're like me, and you're working in a prison or jail or consulting with Silicon Slopes, people don't come to me with happiness and joy all the time. But between you and me, they do. Life is as funny as it is tragic. And if you pay attention, the flavor of tears of grief is just a different flavor than the flavor of tears of joy. And we get to participate in both, not just one. So, the point of the talk today is physician heal thyself or healer heal thyself. All of us are in the business of healing here. And so a key part of our healing is compassion and empathy. And I'd like to distinguish those two terms. For a while I worked in a prison called Wabash Valley Correctional Facility, okay? And my clients were in Supermax. So for those of you that have been to prison, you know that there's various levels of prison, right? Minimum, medium, maximum, supermax, and the whole, or level 5. My beat was level 4 and level 5, okay? So 2 steps above maximum. And so what I got to work with were almost exclusively men who had been convicted of very violent crimes and sexual violent crimes. And one of the things that I was startled to learn is these are some of the most empathic men I've ever met. Now some of you may be going, wait a minute, if there's empathic, why there's serial rapists and serial killers, and I think, no, see, you're confusing empathy with kindness, and that's part of the reason why we're talking about this today. Empathy, according to the definition of my field of psychology, is having a feeling for how other people feel, right? That if they're feeling something, you are feeling something similar as they are describing their feeling to you, okay? One of the things that made these men such successful predators until they were caught is they understood exactly how their victims felt and they got off on it. That's a lot of empathy, but there's something else missing. What's missing there is compassion. Compassion is empathy motivated with care, okay? That when somebody is having a feeling, the feeling that they're having matters to you in a very important, profound, caring way. In fact, one of the things I've found as I've gotten older and older is that empathy without compassion is actually more dangerous, okay? So as some of you may know, I do some consulting on Silicon Slopes, and we'll talk to these CEOs, and there's a couple of them who hold to power, and it kind of gives them like a sense of identity, even a rush or a purpose. And they know how stressed out their employees are in some cases, and they wield that as a weapon of control. This is not competent or good leadership, by the way, but it is leadership. That's empathy without compassion, okay? So there are a couple of manifestations of this particular phenomenon. The word empathy comes from empathos, or in feeling, like feeling into a situation, feeling into somebody's story, feeling into what matters in the moment right here with another person. And in looking out in the world, what we find is that this can manifest in more and less helpful ways. For example, when you are going to a meeting and some of your students, some of these individuals you serve, need extra services, right? You can be an ally, or you can be an advocate, or you can be both. Allies show up with their words saying, I won't get in your way, and yes, that seems like a good idea. Advocates show up to create change. Now I'm going to push for this is meaningful, this is important. Because there's a couple of us with gray hair in the room, some of you may remember the early days of Pride in Provo. Do you guys remember how the first couple of attempts to have a Pride parade were canceled, right, by the city? And so what happened is there were plenty of allies. People say, yeah, we don't oppose that. I'll hold up a rainbow. But very few advocates to go and say, no, this needs to happen. And I'll put myself on the line to make this happen, right? So allyship is often born of empathy. I think it's very important. I don't want to just say allies are bad. No, you need allies. But what you really need are advocates, right? The person who, limited resources, you're in a room, my student, my individual needs extra help. Please, can we talk about this again? I know we're all stressed. Can we put, that's engaging in advocacy. Okay? That's compassion, okay? So sometimes all we can do is hang a flag, right? Like, if we're very concerned about something happening internationally and it is outside of our reach, then pretty much all we can do is change our Facebook profile picture, right? Because there's no effective way to change that. It's outside of the length of our arms, right? We can't effectively do anything there. But sometimes we can, and that's where advocacy comes in. Oh, I can actually do something about this. I can raise some money, I can show up at the meeting, I can make an argument or make a case. So I've noticed that the advocates I work with for various causes tend to be deeply compassionate persons. Okay, so where does compassion come from? The body and the voice. One of the things that's very interesting is we are brainwashed to believe that we're contained within our bodies. That this is, in here is where Matt Draper is located. Now that is in part true, so hence the brainwashing is easy. But it's also in part false. Okay? Right now, for example, are you aware of what's going on within your brain? The neurochemistry going on, the flow of cerebrospinal fluid around your gray matter, the blood going up through your brain. Are you aware? Are you feeling all of that? Some of you say, yes, when I have a migraine, right? But besides that, oftentimes we're not aware of what's going on inside our bodies. In fact, I bet you dollars to donuts right now, what you're aware of is what's going on outside of your body. Your awareness is out here with me. You're supposedly internal to yourself, but what you're aware of right now is out here. It's not in there. Now you can pay attention to how your feet feel, and if you skip breakfast, maybe it'll pangs in your stomach. You can pay attention to what's internal to you. A lot of our awareness, a lot of who we essentially are and where we're essentially focused is external to us. In fact, you guys can see something and behold something and partake of something that is supposedly just me that I never can. And that's this. I never get to see me from the outside. When I look in a mirror, do I see me from the outside or do I see something else? I see a reflection. I never get to see me, exactly. And so therefore, you all have the most intimate part of me, and that's this, that I can never access. And yet I supposedly dwell inside this thing that I can never access, fully appreciate or fully apprehend or comprehend. Oh my gosh. Okay, now, if y'all are in this line of work, this may be a stupid question, I'm going to ask it anyway. How many of you become aware that there is something off with one of your students, one of your colleagues, one of your friends, or one of your family members before they do? Okay, about half of us. Because you are aware of what's going on with them because you can see them from the outside, a place they cannot see themselves. Okay. Here's a little dirty secret about psychotherapy. So my therapist buddies in the room, I'm sorry, I'm going to tell them some deep lore of our field we're not supposed to talk about. All therapy is sharing of perspective. I can see in my clients what they can't see in themselves. I can see their power, I can see their potential, I can see ways in which I can have faith and hope in them, I can see ways in which they can grow and develop and change, and they can't see it because they're internal to themselves, not external to themselves. So us beholding one another's bodies is very important, and you understand what's going on with my body because you have one too. Okay? Our bodies do not separate us, is my argument. They actually connect us, even though we're 10 feet away from each other. For example, my father needed help with a roof, right? His roof was leaking, so he calls up his two sons. Don't know why he calls us, my sisters are far more capable at this, to come over and help him roof. And so we get up on the roof and we're madly roofing away. And as we were just about done, our air tanks were spent, right? The air tanks couldn't keep up with the nail guns. And so we were down to hammer and nails. And my nail pouch was empty. So I stand up to go refill my nail pouch, and I turn around to my little baby brother, Christian, and I go, hey bud, you need nails. And he's pounding away on the top cap, and he looks at me right as the hammer comes down, and he drives the head of a nail, and these are really big, flat-headed roofing nails right up into the web of his hand. right? And so he immediately drops the hammer and brings his hand into his chest like this. And as I'm running up the roof to help, I notice where my hand is as well. As though my hand had been hit by the hammer. It wasn't. Not bleeding. Right? But that immediate visceral reaction. One of my favorite thinkers is a fellow by the name of Levinas. And he talks about when we truly encounter the hunger of another, it is though the bread is snatched from our own mouths, and we feel no choice but to share. Because we know what hunger feels like. We know what pain feels like. So, the other is shared voice. I am helping make sense of the body and our shared experience of the body by using my voice. This is often what people do verbally and non-verbally, right? How can you tell when one of your non-verbal individuals or non-verbal students is in pain?
The way they're acting.
The way they're
body
acting.
language.
Body language, precisely, right? And so they are communicating with their body. That is a metaphor for the voice. Whatever we do to communicate meaning, intentionally or not, we are exercising our voice. And so therefore they are speaking non-verbally into the world, I'm hurting, right? Sometimes whether or not they intend to. Just like your sister who won't ask for help and keeps insisting she's fine, and you're looking at her going, girl, you ain't fine, right? That we can tell, even if they're trying not to communicate it sometimes. So describing our experience helps others relate to that experience, even if they are unable to have that exact same experience, okay? One of the things I'd like you to be sensitive to from here on out is the way in which our individualistic brainwashing is so common in our society. For example, I am very fond of food. My sweetheart and I have a tradition going back decades that I take her to a different restaurant every Friday night. Moving to Utah was like moving to culinary Mecca. Like, we've lived in some pretty big cities like Austin, Texas, but Utah has one of the highest densities of restaurants in the country. Like, I have our dates planned out to the end of 2027 and new restaurants keep coming that way, okay? And so sometimes we'll go on double dates with folk. And we'll take them to a sushi place, for example, and they'll sit down and I'll say, hey, how's the sushi? As we're sharing, say, some sashimi. And they'll look at me so, well, in my experience, and this is just me, and then they'll describe the shared experience we're having of the sushi. You guys caught that? As though all of their experience exists just within the bounds of their flesh. And we're not having a shared experience of a thing called the sushi. Even if I disagree, and even though I say, really, because I'm experiencing it as a little, maybe a day old, you know what I mean, this isn't the best sushi I've had. And so we talk back and forth about the flavor and texture. We're still talking about the same thing. The flavor, the texture. We are having this common experience. We may not have it from the same point of view. Like if I hold up my finger, the camera's looking at it from one side, you're looking at it from another side. It's still the same finger, right? We are still sharing a point of view of a thing. And that's one of the things our society has lost. Like you can say, oh my gosh, well, just my experience of cuticles alone, right? And then the camera goes, I don't see any cuticle, therefore it doesn't exist. When in reality, we can look at things from multiple points of view. It's one of the reasons why therapy is so effective, is because we're able to take up somebody else's point of view and take it seriously, as well as remember our own, right? And so, when we're talking about the body and experience of the body, oftentimes understanding and comprehension is a matter of degree, okay? Not a matter of kind. Well, you as a man can never understand what it feels to give birth to a child. Yep, totally right. And yet, why does it mean so much to me when my sweetheart's going through labor and delivery? I may not understand some parts of the experience, but I do understand other parts of it. I know what it's like to have a big belly that bumps into things. I know what it's like with my back always aching and to feel tired all the time. Not for the same reasons, right? But I know what it's like to have back pain alleviated. I know what it's like to help create space for myself. I'm not a small person. And therefore, if you're to come to my house, the furniture is much more spaced out than in an average American home, right? And so there are some things, I may not get it fully, but I get it to a degree. Like, oh boy. A couple years ago, my sweetheart comes and she shakes me awake. It's about 3 a.m. And she goes, honey, I need to go to the hospital. Now, keep keep in mind, my sweetheart comes from Mormon pioneer stock. Like when we moved to Utah, we were moving back home for her genetics, right? One of her ancestors wrote in her diary that when her husband was called on a mission after first settling in Utah, that she was left by herself pregnant and living in a sod hut, trying to break the desert into farmable ground. And there were raiders going up and down the Wasatch Front at the time. So she's got her rifle in one hand and trying to break the ground with a hand plow in the other, and ends up giving birth in that field, right? And so this is the stock my sweetheart comes from. And so when she says, it's time to go to the hospital, I'm already out the door, right? Because for her to ask for help in this way, she must be dying. So we get to the hospital, and she's extremely sick. So extreme pain, extremely high fever. She can barely talk, she's in so much pain. She's throwing up in the car on the way to the hospital from pain. And she's diagnosed with, she had 9mm kidney stones, a 10mm kidney stones, and both kidneys were infected, okay? Now, are you guys familiar with hypnobirthing? It's where you practice hypnosis with somebody who's going to go through labor and delivery, and it's called birthing under induction, when you're induced in a hypnotic trance, and she did that. It doesn't spare you from the pain, it just gives your brain something else to concentrate on than the pain. And so she did that, and she said these kidney stones were 10 times worse. She thought that was 10 out of 10 pain, and she says, no, it turns out that's a 5. Like, she reset her entire metric for what pain can be. But while she is suffering all of this, I know what 10 out of 10 pain is like for me. And you notice this may be different in kind, because I don't know what it's like for her. I've never had a kidney stone. But I know what it's like to feel so much pain that I throw up. Not from kidney stones in my case. And so there's enough connection, like similarity in kind, where I can get where she's coming from, okay? Even if my experience is a different point of view of the phenomenon of pain, okay? So when we describe our pain to one another, when we describe our experience to one another, that works because we're connected in the body. Yes, my body is not your bodies, and yes, bodies vary. At the same time, though, the experience of the body is something that we share in common, even if our bodies differ. And so therefore, we often have a visceral sense for this, and it starts at a remarkably young age. For example, the other day, my little nephew saw my little niece playing with a train, a little toy train. And so he walked over and grabbed the toy train, because he loves trains. And she starts to object, and she starts reaching for the train. So like a good big brother, he takes her by the face and pushes her on the ground. She then hits the ground, and I'm standing up out of the chair. Okay, and they're fighting, Uncle Matt's got to intervene. And so I'm getting up out of the chair to help, and she bonks her head pretty good. And so he reaches down to comfort her, because he's genuinely really worried expression. I was like, oh no, my poor sister. And he's like trying to cradle her head. But he's holding the train up away from her reaching grasp at the same time, right? And so here they are toddlers, and they already have a sense for one another's suffering, right? Now, some of y'all, I'm betting, are parents. Have you noticed when there's contention in the home, baby cries more? Right? We have a sense, body to body, of what's going on around us in the body that we share. So, compassion is a lot of work. It doesn't need to be a burden, and I'd like to distinguish those two things. A burden is something that you carry, right? Work is something that you do. And so it's important that we distinguish those two things. Those serving in compassionate roles are often very good at what we call creating a clearing of shared understanding. That's a $10 phrase for you. Creating a clearing of shared understanding is when you're working with your clients, your individuals, your students, that you are open to what it is that they are, who it is they are, and what's going on with them. If they can speak, if they can't speak. You're trying to create a clearing of understanding, not only within yourself, but within your relationship. Oh my gosh, that's a lot of work. Okay? We're often stressed, we're often busy, we're often hurried. And coming into a given relationship, coming into a given interaction, we often importantly and even necessarily have an agenda for what it is that needs to be accomplished here. I need to do this with this person, I need to do this with this person, this is what we need to get done, here's what we need to do today. And therefore, it's hard for us to create this clearing of understanding when somebody is a little off, or a lot off, and they're not participating, or can't engage. And so just to stop for a minute when we're busy and stressed is an example of how much work compassion is. Okay? So, I usually have, anywhere from 2 to 4 clinical supervisees at any given time. And because of my profession, sometimes people interested in becoming a psychologist or a therapist of some kind will come and talk to me. And one of the things I hear over and over again are things like, I think I'd be a really good therapist, except I'm just way too nice. I'm way too empathic. Like when I really encounter people, like I really see them, I really feel them, and so I can never be a therapist. And I'm like, that's like you coming up to a neurosurgeon and saying, Doc, I have amazing hand-eye coordination, and I know neuroanatomy better than anyone else, but I can never be a surgeon because I'm just too damn good at it, right? I said, what you need to do is you need to learn to distinguish between work and burden, okay? Work is what we do right now, in the here and now, with those around us, right? Burden is what we carry away from there. And so it can be very important for us to learn to unburden ourselves. So, are you guys familiar with the nice kind dichotomy? Okay, a couple of you, let's review it just in case. Nice is where you are interested in the here and now feelings of the people around you, and you'll do what you can to make sure that everybody is okay, even if what can unfold might be problematic in the long run, right? You won't speak up, you won't stand up, you won't, because people might get upset, or their feelings might be ruffled, you might feel awkward, or you might feel inconvenient or in the way, so you don't say or do anything, you just want to make it nice, like you never create any bumps in the road or any stress or drama from anybody else. Kind is where you do what you believe to be the right thing for the welfare of all involved in the long run, okay? And one of the things that's really neat, having lived all across this country, is culture varies in terms of nice and kind. For example, when I was in New York, we're in Manhattan, we'd rented a car, and the car broke down. And so there we are, we're getting flipped off, honked at, swore at, while people are getting out of their cars to help us manage ours. You tell me what the hell you do. You don't park it there, and here we'll park it over here, and the other parked over here. Pop your hood, motherfucker, we're gonna look at this. And not nice at all, but extremely kind, right? Whereas then I was in Georgia, the same thing happened, right? Very nice, but not kind at all. Nobody pulled over to help. Oh, bless your heart, right? I'll let you guess what Utah is on the nice, kind matrix. But one of the things we find in terms of burden is that nice is easy, because it just means we can placate and smooth things over in the short run. Kind is hard, and that's where the burden can come in. When you leave work and you're worried about one of your people, who could be a colleague, could be a friend, could be one of the individuals you serve, now we're in burden territory. And people who are kind, or who characteristically kind, disproportionately feel that burden. Right? So, the work, and particularly the burden, can create what's called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is when our ability to put the empathy to work emotionally and practically is eroding or burning away. So part of this is built into our culture. It's part of the deep lore of the mind of our society that we often don't talk about. So with compassion, especially in the psychotherapy fields, one of my heroes is a fellow by the name of Mikhail Bakhtin, and he got in a lot of trouble in the Soviet Union because he would not renounce his faith or his beliefs. And even though my faith and his are different, I really admire somebody who would go to the gulag because they refused to renounce their faith, right? And so while he was in the gulag, he did some of his most impressive writing in terms of thinking and how language works and how relationships work and things like that. Then his writings were not discovered by the West until after the Soviet Union fell apart. But he read a bunch of psychology, and he asked an important question, and that is, if psychology is right and empathy is feeling what another person feels, then when somebody comes to a psychologist and they're crying in despair, and the psychologist feeling what the other person is feeling is crying in despair as well, who then is helping? Right? So there is a particular type of exhaustion, this compassion fatigue, that happens when individuals repeatedly and empathically encounter the suffering of another, or they try to put their compassion to work and can't always do it effectively. Or even if they're very effective, they're doing it so much it's burning them out. This is very, very common in caregiver roles. Okay? And many of you, I assume, are in a caregiver role that you're here today. The other thing I'd like to ask you about is, given that most all of us in this room are in caregiver roles, some of you are probably in caregiver roles at home too. So you come here, you're in a caregiver role. Then you go home. If you have elderly parents that you're taking care of, boom, caregiver role. If you have kids at home, boom, caregiver role. If you have both, which is increasingly common, both an elderly parent and kids you're trying to take care of, double down on that caregiver role at home. For some people, there's no reprieve from this role. No matter where they go, they're always on point. No matter where they go, they're always in a position of having to exercise their empathy, their compassion, right? It's a recipe for burnout. So the other thing I'd like to ask is, think of the people that you work with every day, right? Now this is in terms of colleagues. There are those in every organization that we call emotional laborers. These are the people you work with for whom it is safe for you to go and lament to them when you're having a bad day, to celebrate with when you're having a good day. They're the people who are there for you emotionally, okay? Now I'm gonna ask you for a big favor. Take care of your emotional laborers, okay? One of the places where I work, the front desk secretary of this big tech company is the biggest emotional laborer in the room. Now, second highest, right? There's another colleague upstairs who does amazing work there as well. So there she is, an admin, and everybody checks in with her. Pictures of dogs, pictures of a funeral, and she shows this immense care for everybody that interacts with her during the day. And she finds that the best part of her day, that she is there laboring emotionally in her role as an administrator, okay? And so what we find though is they're working harder because they're doing two jobs. They're emotionally laboring for all of us, and they're doing whatever job they're assigned to do at the same time. So take care of them. Flowers, chocolate, whatever they like, occasional steak dinner. So just identify them because they are always working. Now, oftentimes they're not even necessarily aware that they are. Like I sat down with this young lady the other day and I said, "Thank you for all this labor you do for us." And she goes, "Labor? What labor?" I said, "Nikki, you're getting tired." And she goes, "How'd she know?" It's a psychologist. She goes, "You're like psychic, right?" And I say, "No, bags under your eyes. It doesn't take psychic powers to see this." So when a system is in stress, okay, you'll see that first usually in your emotional laborers. What do I mean by a system is in stress? The powers that be, right, the state of Utah, the administrators of this particular facility, decide to make changes, but they're not in the know. They're not working with these individuals every day, so they're going to make big changes that's going to disrupt things that are going well and cause things that won't go well. That creates systemic stress. Are we on the same page? And therefore, the first people to feel that change are your emotional laborers, okay? Because everybody's going to be coming to them about their worry, panic, or concern about the change that's undertaking. So please take good care of your emotional laborers. So some symptoms of compassion fatigue, and you notice I'm saving what to do about it for a minute, kind of giving you guys a big tease here. So the first symptom that we see of compassion fatigue, this isn't really, I guess I need to rephrase that. This is one of the symptoms, but not everybody who experiences compassion fatigue experiences this. It's just common. And that is emotional exhaustion. It's like the other day, for example, one of my colleagues has a disabled parent at home, a disabled brother at home, and 2 kids, and she's a single mom. So she is always on emotional point, right? And she came in one day to work and she was just frustrated. She throws her bags down, flops down on my couch to just check in for a minute. I'm like, "Dude, what is up?" And she goes, "I just can't carry weight like I used to. Like when my kids are upset, rather than really getting on my knees and, okay, what's going on with you and let's connect. Instead it's, okay, Kleenex, pat on head, go away." And she says, "What's going on with me? I just can't carry the weight like I used to." Conversations that used to be easy to engage in
and easy to navigate, it becomes depleting. Depleting is that process of when you're feeling drained, like you're feeling it in real time. You are drained, you're in a depleted state. Or if you're in a conversation with somebody, you feel like you're being depleted sometimes. Not necessarily that they're intending to do that, but that's what's happening. And so, for those who are suffering compassion fatigue, it's like they can never get their reservoir full again. It's like it's filling a little, emptying a little, filling, emptying, filling and emptying just a little bit. They can't really recharge it. And so they find themselves tuning out of conversations more and tuning into what's going on less. This kind of exhaustion can exacerbate depressive symptoms. Like for those that are sensitive to melancholia, like that, I really am frustrated with the field of psychiatry because some of our older terms were better. Melancholia is the agony deep in the bones. It is a heavy, dull ache that never goes away. Okay, and I don't mean literally in your bone tissue. What I mean is it's so deep inside that you can smile, how you doing, Bob? I'm doing great, thank you very much. But inside they're dead, right? That's melancholia. And major depressive disorder, recurrent severe, just doesn't communicate the same thing. So disruptions to sleep, disruption to appetite, anhedonia, all of these, anhedonia means things I used to enjoy, I don't enjoy anymore, and without hedonia, hedonism, without pleasure, without joy. So I don't know why I feel so down. Nothing is particularly wrong in my life. I hear this all the time. Why do I feel so down, so empty, so depleted all the time? There's nothing wrong. Work's going well. I love my family. Well, let's look at your reservoir, shall we? Where is it at? So another symptom is reduced empathy. There was a friend of mine came in the other day and he said, Matt, I really need you to slap me. And I went, no. And I go, why, what's going on? And he says, I was sitting here talking to this client, and then later I talked to this client, and I'm sitting there complaining in my head about the first client because of the suffering of the second client. I go, what do you mean? First client comes in, young man, has an existential crisis because his goldfish died. Okay, it wasn't a goldfish, it was a fancy black betta fish, and it was really flowy, veil-y fish. And his parents had bought that for him when he moved into his dorm rooms, okay? And so he had been sheltered his entire life from funerals, from death, from anything like that. And so here he is at 18, and he comes in, and this gift from his parents died, this fish, and he just was overwhelmed by the realization, I'm gonna die, everything's gonna die, oh my gosh, having an existential crisis. But then later he's talking to a young lady who had just lost 2 of her family members in a car accident. She was just diagnosed with cancer and is trying her best to keep her chin up. And he goes, so now I think that younger man, the young man with the betta fish, I'm like, he's not worthy of my compassion. And he goes, but that goes against my core values. Everybody's worthy of compassion. What's going on? Well, let's look at your reservoir, shall we? And he was pretty depleted. And part of the symptom of that depletion is he's then just, okay, this person's worthy of my empathy, this person isn't. So this can cause, as you know, some dissonance, cognitive dissonance, like it did with my friend. That, wait, what I'm feeling kind of goes against my values. This young man's suffering is real, the existential crisis. And this woman's suffering, having lost so much and now she's losing her health, is also a crisis. Emotional and social distancing. One of the things that we find when our reservoirs are empty is we start avoiding topics that are hard to hear. Okay? It's like, telling on myself for a minute. One of my daughters and her fiance live in Florida. She's a very successful tattoo artist. And she comes up here for residencies, where she'll come here, she'll be here for a week, work with a bunch of clients, and go back to Florida, work with her clients there. And she came in the other day, and I'm sitting in my big fluffy chair, got my 55-inch monitor, playing Diablo 4, I've got my big headphones on, listening to death metal, right? And she comes in and she taps me on the top of the head, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what the hell? And I look up and she goes, Dad, would you come get in the hot tub with me? And I'm like, what's going on? She said, I need to talk. And I said, go ahead and sit here, sweetie, and this, lazy boy next to me. And she goes, Dad, the only way I can get your undivided attention is if we go on a walk or if I get you in the hot tub, because you'll avoid engaging with me emotionally if we don't do either of those things. Out of the mouth of babes, right? And it shook me because she was right. That the only way you're going to get my undivided attention after a very long and stressful day, when my energy level is 0, is you got to get me into something that's recharging my batteries, like a good walk with somebody I care about, or soaking in the hot tub with somebody I care about. That gets my battery level up enough that I can actually engage again. And she had something important she wanted to talk about. So we avoid topics. We avoid the people who bring up these topics. We seek isolation. Normally, socially connected people, well-connected people, start acting like introverts, and introverts even more so like introverts. There's also those feelings of detachment and cynicism, right? Detachment, just going through the motion, mechanistic autopilot. They let their habits carry the day rather than intending the behaviors they're engaging in. Okay, I'm going to tell a story about Will. He was one of my first supervisors in psychology. And I was sitting down and I was walking through my client roster. This is one of my first practica as a doctoral student. And I'm walking through and I'm talking to him about it. And he made an offhand comment. He says, well, this person has this issue, do this thing. This person has this other issue, do that thing. And I went, well, yes, they have that issue, but the thing to do, you can have 12 people with the same issue. But because they come about that issue differently, your interventions need to be different based on that particular client. And he says, no, just follow the manual. I go, but what about their unique needs? He says, look, I don't even bother learning their names anymore. I was like, you see 40 clients a week? And he goes, yeah, I just deal with the issue at hand. Oh boy. So 30 years later, I still hold that up as, please don't let me get here. If there's a God in heaven, please don't let me get to that point, right? And so I appreciate in very hard days why he would go on autopilot. Okay, you're suffering from depression, let me pull the manual off the wall, do this worksheet for your depression, right? Because he was so depleted he couldn't engage emotionally anymore. Cynicism, pervasive sense of pessimism. Why try? Nothing helps. Another one is, well, this person's the source of their own problems, right? If Mikey wasn't so hard for Sterling to get along with, then Mikey would be fine. So therefore, Mikey is causing his own problems, right? That is a sign of cynicism. And so therefore, we can disengage based on that context. That's signs that we're already tired, maybe we're already aching. So therefore, we get a little cynical as a way to not have to emotionally engage. Oh boy. Another one I see is a decreased sense of accomplishment and the way the body compensates for all this stress. There's a scene in the Incredibles movie. It's early on in the first one where he's still wearing the black and blue suit, and Bob Parr, Mr. Incredible, is sitting there, he's being interviewed by a reporter. He says, I feel like the maid. You know, some supervillain comes, I clean up this mess, 20 seconds is another man. Why don't you just leave this place clean? And he gets up and storms away from the camera. Your efforts will never bear permanent fruit, right? There will always be the supervillain of another behavioral episode, another trauma, another big thing, because life is that way. And when you're on the front lines trying to help people heal or cope or function in the face of this, it can feel like your task is never ending. And so therefore the sense of despair can come up. Is anything I really do mattering to anyone? Right? They're still going to be in this spot. They're still going to be in this situation tomorrow. Why try? Right? It's a sign of pretty severe depletion. This can also give rise to what we call imposter syndrome. Why did they give me this job? I suck at it. Like some days, soon, somebody's going to find out I'm really not good at this job, and they're going to fire me, and they're justified in doing so. So I'm going to do what I can on my tiny little fume of a gas tank of reserves to overcompensate for my insecurities and burn myself out even more, because I'm afraid they're going to find out I'm not actually good at what this is. Okay? This pervasive sense of helplessness can bleed over to the point where I've noticed among some of my colleagues, they kind of give up even at home, where they don't feel like anything they do helps anybody at any time. And so I'd also like to just touch on some of the physical and psychological symptoms. Headaches, irritability, anxiety, insomnia, depressed mood. We already talked about anhedonia, fatigue. This is not a medical term. Please don't add this to your lexicon. But it's what I call cortisol poisoning. So cortisol is a stress hormone that we all have. When we're stressed out, in acute stress, cortisol is our best friend. But when we're regularly operating under high cortisol levels, it's like acid on stone, right? It just bubbles and just erodes away. It's really helpful in the long run. Polish that stone right up. Sorry, in the short run, it polishes that stone right up, but in the long run, it erodes the stone away, right? And so, again, there's no medical condition of cortisol poisoning, instead it's the exhaustion phase of stress. But it's one where the very thing that helped us in short doses in the short run, like to run away from a bear, is literally eroding our health every day as we're going to work and facing all the bears there that never seem to go away. So, medicae cura te ipsum, healer, heal thyself. I thought this came from Galen. He's an ancient Greek physician, but a colleague of mine corrected me and said it actually comes from the New Testament, Luke 4:23. It's actually an admonition for us to practice what we preach. Do we treat ourselves in line with the treatment we would give clients and what we would encourage them to do if they suffered our symptoms? Okay? Doctors are the worst patients. Some of you get that, right? Like, I lost a doctor to lung cancer because he was a pack-a-day smoker. Okay? And so nobody could tell him what his symptoms were. It's just a cough. No, it was lung cancer. Okay? And so one of the things that is important for us is to reflect on, if somebody came to me and they were suffering these things, what advice would I give them? Right? And it's really hard to do that. And that gives us really good appreciation for when we give advice to other people, it's going to be really hard for them to do it. Okay? At the same time, though, it's an important exercise to do. So, some ideas on how to treat compassion fatigue. One is self-awareness, right? When you get in your car, check in with yourself. How you doing? Okay? I know denial's a thing, but I hope you'll be honest with yourself as much as you're able. How you doing? How'd today go? What went well? What didn't? How do you feel? What do you need when you get home? Like doing that, especially working in the prison, I would get home and Sweetie would go, okay kids, my kids were little then, they're all adults now. They'd come run up, they'd give Dad a hug and kiss, and then they would go play, and then I would sit in my computer in this little room. It was an enclosed front porch there in Indiana, and I would just murder, death, kill on a video game for a while, just to decompress. But that didn't come about magically. I said, honey, when I get home, especially from working at level 5, I'm very emotionally depleted, and what I need is just a minute. She says, but you're the most extroverted person I know. And I said, yeah, but it turns out extroverts can get depleted in people. Okay, so please, I love my kids, I love you, I want to give you all a hug and a kiss, but then I need about an hour to just breathe and calm down and pwn some nubs on Call of Duty, okay? I don't know what kids call it these days, but back then, right? And so it really was helpful, but it was a negotiated compromise. But we haven't always been able to do that. You know, Mom got sick. Well, now I need to go straight from work and help take care of Mom, and I don't get that hour because Mom has needs. Okay, now what else can I do? How can I ask other people to help and provide a buffer, et cetera? We're able, and they're not always. So, boundary setting. The loving power of the word no. Okay? One of the things about that nice, kind dichotomy I've noticed since moving to Utah is I've noticed that my colleagues, my students, et cetera, will say yes to me a lot when they should say no. You know, they're overwhelmed, they're stressed, but you know, you put on the happy face and, hey, Dr. Draper, how you doing today? I'm great. Okay, we're working on this project. Can you get this? Yes, I'll get that part. And inside they're dying and having a panic attack, right? But they walk out of there, I'm none the wiser. And then the next week goes by, we've got this big conference presentation to do, and they're nowhere to be found. Okay? One of the things that we find when we pay attention is that no can be one of the most loving words that we can use. Okay? Boundaries are a relational, not personal event. Let me say that again. Boundaries are a relational, not personal event. We have boundaries so we can keep relationships. Like the other day, for example, a friend of mine said, that's it, I'm cutting Mom out of my life. I'm setting up a boundary. And I said, no, what you're doing is erasing all boundaries and ignoring Mom, like putting her on blast, like sorry, not putting it the opposite. Blocking, silencing, right? There are now no boundaries there. You've erased all the boundaries because Mom kept breaking the boundaries you had in an attempt to stay in relationship with her, right? And part of maintaining healthy boundaries to maintain a relationship with a person is to say no when appropriate. When you are drowning, don't volunteer to take on more weight, okay? So I've done a lot of work in the addictions field, right? As you know. And one of the things that we really hit our clients with is put the mask on yourself first when the plane is going down, right? Well, that's so selfish. No, everybody else should get oxygen before me. So I had a colleague of mine who is a flight attendant for Delta, and he came in and did group therapy with us one day. He was our guest speaker. And he came in and said, here's the interesting thing. There is a gap of time between the time you pass out due to hypoxia, deprivation of oxygen, you're suffocating. There's a time you pass out and a time you die. And it's a much bigger window of time than the time between oxygen starts to drop and you pass out. So you've only got a few seconds to get the mask on yourself, because while people are unconscious around you, you can get the masks on them and save their lives. You've got this tiny little window between consciousness and unconsciousness, but a big window between unconsciousness and death, because the body will fight to survive. Put the mask on yourself first. Okay? That is not selfish, it is loving. And sometimes, to put the mask on yourself, you gotta say no to other people. So try to draw boundaries where you can around your work and personal life. These are boundaries of love, they're made of love, right? Loving relationships, hobbies, activities that help you feel centered. So do I have time to get into that deep lore? No, we only got 8 minutes left. But, like Bakhtin said, this is something I'd like to add to the loving power of no. What creates a burden is when you don't exercise that loving power. Like, I've got 2 supervisees right now, both of whom are deeply spiritual people. One is Christian, I believe Latter-day Saint, and the other one is Buddhist. And what they do is at the end of their day, when they sit in the car and do their self-check-in, they lovingly say no to trying to carry their clients home. Okay, that's when the burden steps in, right? It goes from work to a burden. So my Christian supervisee, what she does is she prays to her God and she says, Heavenly Father, would you please care for these people while I'm gone? Because I can't. I'm not going to be there. They're outside of the reach of my grasp, right? The Buddhist, please universe, please take care of these people while I'm gone, because they will be outside of my awareness, okay? And so it's that very loving, no, I can't carry you right now. I got to leave you here. I got to leave you at work. I got to leave you at the prison. I got to leave you in the addictions clinic. I got to leave you here at the developmental center. I need to leave you there because there are other people that need me out here. When I come back, I will pick you up again, but not until then. And so, like my Buddhist supervisee, she does it over and over again. She'll be like washing dishes and she'll start ruminating about her clients and she'll go, I love you, no. You know what I mean? This is time for me to be washing dishes, not trying to carry you. Developing healthy habits is a big one. Exercise. It's really tricky telling depressed people to exercise and stressed out people, because they'll say, you're saying I have to run a marathon? No, please don't. That's exercise to the other side. Do any of you know of these people called ultra athletes, like ultra marathoners? Okay, there are people who will run 50 to 100 miles or more. And they're some of the most lovely people I know. I'm obviously not a runner. But when I go and help, that's like there's a total lack of exercise, and then there's too much exercise. Both are correlated with mental health problems. Okay, when I say exercise, I mean get your heart rate up 70% above baseline, 20 minutes a day, at least 4 times a week. This is a brisk 20-minute walk. Like a colleague of mine, Dr. Jorgensen, she's a neuroscientist, and she calls gentle cardio a bubble bath for your brain. The same thing that your cerebrospinal fluid does at night to clean all the metabolites, all the leftover stuff in your brain at the end of a day, all the biological matter that builds up, exercise does that while you're awake. Okay, it's a bubble bath for your brain. It may be stressful to exercise sometimes, but it's soothing for your central nervous system. Mindfulness and meditation, big fan of yoga. A dear friend of mine is a certified yoga instructor, and she and I developed a big man yoga flow. And that's what I was doing this morning before I got here, right? Doing my big man yoga flow. Because yoga is usually built for skinny people, right? And so she helped me figure out how to do yoga for big people. And it has saved my back, I swear. And so the other day, for example, I heard some of my supervisees laughing because I was doing yoga in the middle of the day, and they're like, they knock on the door, and I'm like, oh, I'm with you, and they're going, oh, Draper's doing his big man yoga, right? And it was fun, okay? And so, likewise, there are simple things you can do at your desk, there are simple things you can do in your office, if you have ones, things you can do in the grass, meditate, mindfulness. Sunlight, trees, touch grass, you know what I mean? It's interesting that that has a soothing effect on some people's nervous system. Creative pursuits. This can be creation or participation. Some people say, Oh, I'm really musical. Oh, how many instruments do you play? I'm an incredibly musical person. I collect music, that's my hobby. And I collect ways to listen to music. I can't carry a tune to save my life, okay? But therefore, this intentional participation in these meaningful creative pursuits, okay? Putting together the best heavy metal playlist. So, date nights for those of you in a relationship. I could do a whole series of units on this. Dr. Draper's School of Love, okay? And so I've done that for other organizations, but to be intentional about your affection for others, okay? If you're married or partnered, and if your partner is amenable to this, to actually carve out time for one another, go on a walk together. You know, my sweetie, our habits are dinner and a movie or dinner and dancing every Friday night, okay? So, kid time. Intentionally paying attention to your children individually where able. One of my favorites, the taste of healthy, good food. You know what I mean? Like, I hate to break it to you, a cheeseburger, if that's the only cheeseburger you have that week, it can be very healthy. If all you have is cheeseburgers, well, now we got a different problem, okay? But actually enjoying and savoring what you eat. And then, of course, the biggest one is relationships. Create and capitalize on supportive friends and family. Learn to ask for help and learn to accept help when they can offer what you can receive. Okay? This is a really big idea. I asked for help and nobody helped me. And one of my first questions, my first response is, I'm so sorry, that sounds awful. But my second response is, what help did you ask for and who did you help it from? For example, when my grandfather was alive, I didn't go to Grandpa when I was emotionally upset. Grandpa would be like, you know, slap some mud on that, get you back to work. That'll cure you up good, right? That was Grandpa's response to everything. Not helpful. Okay? Well, okay. Most of the time, not helpful. But there are other people who can provide what I need. And the trick is asking the right people based on the right need, and that can take some figuring out. I have many sisters, for example. I've got 5 of them. And one of them can respond emotionally well. The other are powerhouse intellectuals like doctorate degrees in all these fancy big fields, right? They're super boss, awesome humans. But when I need help with, can you help me set a budget? Boom, 4 of my sisters are really good at that. Hey, I need to make a moving plan because we're gonna move across country. Boom, 3 of my sisters are really good at that. Hey, I'm really depressed and I'm in a cloud of yuck. Can I have a hug? 0 of my sisters are good at that, right? And so the trick is asking the people, right people for the right help, okay? And that can be a little bit of a trial or error thing. So if you're suffering an emotional load, ask your colleagues for help. Hey, I love Mikey, I can't really deal with him today. I'm kind of depleted. Would you help troubleshoot Mikey? I'll go help Travis, okay? If you are talking to other people about how you're doing, try to use feeling words rather than thinking words. And try to actually use real feeling words that actually identify emotion. Well, I feel that this isn't going well. Okay, you just use a thinking statement with a feeling word. I feel worried that things aren't going well. Now we have an emotional word in there. What's interesting is it's easier for us to process our own emotions and other people's emotions when they will use feeling words. And I've noticed people around here don't like to use feeling words. It's kind of similar to the Midwest. Whereas when we were in Portland, there was feeling words everywhere, and that might have been too much of a good thing. Okay, but here people usually use thinking phrases with a feeling stem. Survival strategies. Deep breathing. I was in a meeting with a friend of mine the other day. The meeting wasn't going well, not between she and I, but just in general, systemic stress. And I look over and I notice that somehow she gets a 1/2 inch taller and a 1/2 inch shorter as she's sitting there. 1/2 inch taller and a 1/2 inch shorter. And so I kind of nudge her and I go, bro, what's going on? She goes, what I'm doing is I'm doing my exercises. What she was doing is she pulls her stress into her glutes and lower back. And so as we were sitting there in this meeting that was not going well, she would flex her glutes and lower back, which would raise her up, and she was doing her breathing exercises at the same time. And I'm like, I can't imagine how many lives you're saving at the moment. She's got a pretty hot temper on her. But by doing that was a way for her to emotionally regulate the stress in this meeting that wasn't going well. I'm like, teach me, and she did. It's amazing. Okay, and so holding breath. Have you guys ever been in a long meeting and you're starting to nod off? No, I'm the only one? Okay, 2 of us. Well, for both of us, there's this neat technique I've learned called holding your breath. It's that simple. That as you find yourself nodding off, you take a subtle deep breath in and just hold it. That will raise your heart rate up. Your body will go, "You're dying!" And your heart rate starts when you're going to be awake for 5 more minutes. It doesn't last a long time, but you may need to do that over and over again in certain meetings. Take breaks. Get up. Move your body when you can. Socially connect with supportive peers. Again, we're helpful and when you can. Peer support. Never remain the only one helping. Okay? If you feel like what you're doing doesn't matter, ask your peers to help you reflect on your accomplishments and reflect on theirs with them too, even if they didn't ask. Okay? Remind yourself. Like, in prison, most of the guys I worked with were going to die in prison, so what the hell was I doing there? Well, what I was doing is their day was better because I was there. They're not going to get out of prison and everything's magically going to be okay with their lives and become productive members of society. No. But their day was better because I was there. And sometimes our goals are pretty modest because of that. Embrace the fact that fatigue is not due to weakness and stress is not due to failure. I had a colleague in the prison once tell me, she says, well, if that monk in Vietnam can immolate himself and just lay there, sit there peacefully while he's burning, that shows that stress is a choice. And I went, well, you haven't practiced much meditation. Meditation is a way to cope with the stress your body is suffering. It doesn't make it go away. It's not a magic wand. Yoga doesn't just poof and all your stress goes away. Meditation, poof, doesn't poof your stress away. Instead, it's a way to cope with the stress your system is under. Stress is not a choice. Responding to it sometimes is, but not always, because we have these things called fight or flight responses. We don't choose those responses. But how we handle it in the long run, we can develop skills to cope. So here is some of my contact information. My Instagram's Old Dr. D. We've got a few videos on YouTube at Old Dr. D, and then we've got a little podcast on Spotify. I think we've got like 10 episodes up. We've got 12 more recorded called Perspectives on Life. We're thinking of starting another podcast called Deep Lore of the Mind. So if you're interested in the kind of topics I'm sharing today, those will be we'll touch on them in our socials and in our podcast. So thank you all very much for coming today. I appreciate you all joining me.
Thank you very much. I'm hoping we can get him to come back again.
All conference.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. Okay, any questions? Any comments? Okay.
The word no, when I came back, I took on a very difficult individual. And my first meeting with my immediate supervisor was, you cannot use the word no.
Oh,
She learned the word no within a week.
oh boy. Okay.
And it changed the rapport and relationship dramatically.
So coming back, because I don't know that the people on camera, I'm going to reiterate your story for you, if that's okay. So coming back here, you were told not to say no to an individual?
Specifically one individual, yeah.
Specifically one, by your
Yeah.
supervisor, and your supervisor learned that no is a necessary
The
and valuable
individual
role.
learned.
Oh, the individual one.
So in my dealings with her, 16 hours a day, 3 days in a row, or whatever it was.
16 hours a day, 3 days. The
I mean,
individual.
yes, so no became a very well learned. So bucking the bronco, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I had to deal with some pretty strong issues,
Um,
and just being able to hunker that down, using the word no, hey, we're not doing this today,
Yeah.
right?
Hey, don't buck the bronco, we're not doing the bronco.
Yeah, so once that got bucked, life was very good.
Yeah, it's interesting how boundaries help in that.
And there's still been issues, but my report has been good.
Yeah, well, when they know when you're around,
Yes.
where the parameters are, where the boundaries are.
Yeah.
And clarity can provide comfort. Thank you. Other questions or observations?
Okay.
Okay, again, thank you all very much for coming, and thank you for reaching out.
Do you have a question?
Oh, a question, please.
No, the observation that sometimes we don't want to help somebody because they got themselves in that situation.
Oh, ooh.
That's-
We could talk about the line between helping and enabling.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I hear about that all the time whenever I talk about personal family things, and you say, okay, I'm doing this for this person, and, oh, you're enabling, and I'm like, well, if no one does this for them, then this will happen until they can help themselves. So maybe,
Yeah, well, especially in the addictions world.
yes.
Like, I remember I was 18, sleeping behind a dumpster in the middle of January. Because people who loved me enough to say, no, you're sleeping behind a dumpster in January, right? At the same time though, as I sobered up and started to regain trust, then they would tentatively say, okay, yeah, you can crash on my couch for one night, right? That loving power of no, you can't stay a second night, but you can stay this. But I needed to regain that trust. They needed to love me enough to let me suffer. And it's very burdensome and often very unclear where is the relationship between suffering and punishment, because suffering can be very instructive if we pay attention. Punishment can be very instructive, but can also just be punitive. People are sick of us, sick of our garbage, right? And so therefore out of their own frustration, they're lashing out. But sometimes punishment is intended to be instructive. With that comes the need for clear communication. Regardless, it's, if I do this now, next week, next year, 10 years, what will the good and the harm be? And so I was really enabled by people who were nice, but I was left to sleep behind a dumpster by people who were kind. Does that make sense? And so sometimes when you explain to your loved ones going, okay, let's talk about nice, kind, because you can be both, right? But err on the side of kind, especially in issues of enablement. You're welcome.
Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, thank you everybody for coming.
Thank you.
Who's that?